I'm Professor Lavender, and thank you for watching this video. Today I'm really excited because I am here with a dear friend and fandom expert nerd, Angie Fazekas. So today she's going to talk to us about fandoms, specifically queer fandoms, and we're going to talk about it in the context of Pokemon and just fandoms in general. So Angie, would you like to introduce yourselves to the lovely Pokemon world?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Angie. I am a PhD candidate and course instructor at the University of Toronto, and I study fandom. I've been a part of fandom since I was about 14 years old. Been through multiple and many fandoms. Reading, writing fan fiction is mostly what I do, but I do a lot of other fanish stuff as well. And I'm currently writing my dissertation about teenagers in fandom, and I'm really excited to be here to chat about fandom today.
We're so excited! I actually kind of really just want to talk about your fan fiction, but we're not here for that. Yeah, let's put a plug in for Angie's fan fiction. Yes! So Angie, can you talk about your research and yourself and how you got into fandoms?
Yeah, like I said, I got into fandoms when I was about 14. I probably would have been in fandom earlier, but we literally didn't have the internet until I was 14 years old. And it was within the first week of us having the internet, I was searching up the show Boy Meets World, which, you know, gives you an idea of how old I am. And I ran across fan fiction and was like, what is this? And dove into it. And I've really never looked back. I grew up in Northern Ontario as a queer person in Northern Ontario. There were not a lot of representation, not a lot of options for me, not a lot of queer community. And through fandom was sort of how I figured out not only that I was queer, but what that meant for me and for my desires and my identity and my politics and all of these things. So now I'm actually interested in looking at current teenagers in fandom and their experiences, particularly queer teenagers, and how queer teenagers use stuff like fan art and fan fiction and sort of creative fan work in order to figure out their own identities and desires and attractions and all of those things.
I find that really exciting because I am really stoked about, I don't talk much about children. I don't think much about children. I also don't talk much about my life as a young queer either, so that's super exciting.
I didn't used to either until I actually took a class on adolescent sexuality, and I was like, oh, I have some depth like to plunge here about my own like history and everything. So that's how I got into it, but yeah.
I think a really big question I have, and I mostly have this question because I've talked to you a little bit about fandoms before, but I would like you maybe to explain to me and also to others who are viewing, what's the difference or the definition of fans versus fandoms?
So there are like official definitions of that, and then ways that those words are sort of used more colloquially or casually. So the way I like to think about it as being a fan of something can be, it can be an active sort of thing, or it can be a passive sort of thing. Whereas being fanish or being in fandom is always kind of an active thing. So one of the examples I use, I'm a fan of Downton Abbey, but I'm not fanish about Downton Abbey, which means that like I will sit and I've watched the entire series multiple times. I will do again. If they ever come out with a movie, I'll watch another one. But I leave it at that. I watch it, I enjoy it, but I don't want to engage with it any further. Whereas for me, being fanish or part of fandom is when you want to engage beyond just sort of like the official material. So whether that's writing fan fiction, drawing fan art, making fan videos, collecting merch, writing papers or essays or meta online about characters or whatever, like it's just sort of a drive and a desire to engage more actively and more fully with a particular media text.
That's a really good reading of it because I've been thinking about that in the context of my engagement with Pokemon, because as a child I was really into the franchise. I had all the movies, I played all the video games, and I watched it, but I didn't really engage with the actual like canonization of it either, or even just I had the collections, but now I'm actually more interested in the collections of the cards than I actually am about the videos and the films and the gaming. So that's an interesting comparison.
And I think that's sort of the moment it becomes sort of more fandom and fanish than just being a fan, is when you really, like, canon is one thing, it's great, that's there, but, like, you want to do more with it. You want to engage more with it in some capacity. And sometimes that's because you're dissatisfied with the canon, or sometimes it's because you love it so much and you just want more of it, or whatever it is. And Pokemon's actually almost a sort of different way of looking at it, because such a trans media. Like, there's so many different components of it. It's not just a TV show or a movie or whatever. So there's many and multiple ways of engaging with it. And I know several people who write Pokemon fan fiction. I know, obviously, you and tons of other people who do the collecting of the cards and the thinking about Pokemon and stuff beyond just sort of like playing the games or whatever. So yeah, like, there's lots of ways, I think, of being fanish with something.
I actually was thinking about the way that you were explaining canon and not being happy with canon and wanting to change it, or being happy with canon and wanting to engage with it. And I'm wondering if maybe you could talk about that in the ways of fandoms and how we're trying to queer Pokemon, but also the way that Pokemon's already queer and people are ignoring that from canon, and then when queer people talk about the canon as being queer, then we're reading into it. Maybe you could expand a little bit more on why we would want to create that type of space and why we want to have those conversations.
Well, that gets really into a lot of the history of online fandom and everything as well. Because if we're talking about, like, online fandom as it stands today, in a lot of ways, it started with Star Trek in the 1960s, and people writing fan fiction about Kirk and Spock from Star Trek. And these women that would make these, what were called zines or homemade magazines, sharing fan fiction and fan art about Kirk and Spock. And so right from the onset, fandom was a queer space, because it was looking for queerness in a text where it wasn't explicit and it wasn't necessarily canon, but people wanted to see that. And for many, many years, fandom was not wholly, there's a lot of different aspects of fandom, but there was a big subsect of fandom that was queer people that wanted to see queerness on TV or in movies. And for a very long time, there wasn't really sort of canon queer representation. And so queer people got really used to looking for moments of subtext or looking for representation, even if it wasn't explicit and it wasn't canon. And sometimes those moments of subtext were put in there purposefully by the creators because they wanted to show queer people being queer, and they weren't necessarily allowed by the network or the production company or whatever. And sometimes those are just sort of accidental moments that people read as queer that weren't meant to be queer. But for whatever reason, there are these moments of queerness that people have been looking for a really long time. And even now that there's a lot more queer people in media than there was before, there's still not, like, there's a lot of us that feel like there's not enough. And especially in sort of sci-fi fantasy kind of fandoms, there aren't a lot of queer people. So people like me who grew up in fandom really like to look for those moments and try to capitalize on them, where when canon disappoints us for not being queer enough, or when it is queer but maybe not everybody recognizes that. So I'm not personally as familiar with Pokemon as other people are, but I know I've been sort of following sort of the fringes of the Pokemon fandom since the 90s, or whenever it became sort of first appeared on the scene. And people have been finding moments of queerness in Pokemon for basically as long as it's existed. Because queer people want to see that. They want to see that representation. They want to feel like they belong, even if it's not sort of explicitly canon. Does that answer?
That's great. I was thinking of some examples of subtext in Pokemon, and I think we've already showed quite a few of those examples in this channel. But so, for instance, Team Rocket James, who's constantly cross-dressing and not needed to do his job, but he's doing it anyways. And that was never really considered by heteronormative people as queer, but then as being a queer person seeing that, I actually feel seen. I'm like, yeah, that's a moment that I can speak to, even though, others may not read that as such. And I think that's a lot of what we've been trying to talk about in this channel, is the subtext is actually just as powerful because some of us know how to read it and some of us know how to feel it. So that's really a really enlightening thought that you just shared.
And I really think is if you grew up queer and weren't seeing the kinds of representation you wanted, you really got like, you almost developed a talent at looking for moments of queer subtext. It's like almost a skill that you develop as a queer person. And I'm sure of many other identities as well. I know that there are autistic people out there that like find these moments where they relate to characters because it's like, that's an autistic sort of thing that I recognize. So it's a lot of different identities, but people get really good at reading that subtext. And so if you don't read that subtext, if you're not a queer person, if you're not looking for that sort of things, you might not see it the same way that queer people do. But it's there.
Before we get in a little bit to like the history of queerness, can we talk about the definition of queer baiting?
Yeah.
What that means in the context, just to give some contextualizations for those who are watching.
Well, watch the TV show Supernatural, and you will figure out the definition of queer baiting. But
I knew you'd want to talk about this.
yes, I have been deeply obsessed. I was in Supernatural fandom from about 2005 to 2010, and I fell out of it, but I've been recently re-obsessed with it because of, for those of you who know, in the third to last episode, I believe, either the fourth to last or the third to last episode of Supernatural this year, two characters that have been shipped heavily, Dean Winchester and Castiel the Angel. Castiel announced to Dean that he loved him. He told Dean he loved him, and then immediately died right afterwards. Spoiler alert if anybody hasn't caught up with Supernatural. But it's this queer baiting is essentially when a show knows that there are fans of its characters and is reading those characters as queer, and that the writers and directors and producers are aware of that and sort of hint at it or give the queer fans these moments, these like subtextual moments, or sometimes textual moments. Sometimes they're very obvious sorts of moments, but with no intent to actually carry through and make those characters queer. So for instance, like Dean and Castiel from Supernatural, there are many and multiple moments throughout the series where it's very heavily implied that they're sort of into each other, or they're flirting, or that they've had some sort of like sexual relationship at some point or another. And the show and the actors and the writers and the directors were all very well aware of this huge community that wanted these two characters together. And they kept offering them these little tidbits, these little moments. But if you never follow through with those moments, and that just becomes, for queer fans, just a moment like frustration. It's just irritating and frustrating, and it's like, we know you're there and we want to keep you watching, but we're never actually going to give you the representation you want.
Yeah, and I think there's something that happens also where it's kind of the opposite. You've talked about this a little bit in the context of networks not allowing queer things to happen. So you kind of give a little bit of a piece of queerness and it doesn't really get revealed until later. An example of that in Pokémon is Professor Ivy, who there's this character Brock who's in love with every woman that comes into his sight, and usually there's some type of engagement between him and the woman, but she's the only one who doesn't handle his attack or any of his attempts at attracting her. And it wasn't until literally last year where a writer from Pokémon, and this is early 90s franchise, where a writer said, well, that's because she was a lesbian. And it's like, at that time, you could have never said that on the network or made that clear. But now we're getting these people coming out. It's kind of like when J.K. Rowling, I don't want to talk about J.K. Rowling, but was like, Dumbledore's gay. But that was never explicit in canon or in any writing. So that's becoming a little bit more of like a clear movement towards almost like backpedaling or just trying to save this lack of queerness, I think, is an interesting movement as well.
And it's interesting because there's like, so for so long there was actually a law in the books called the Hays Code where like queer people could not have happy endings in media. Like it was literally inscribed in law. And so queer producers and queer directors and all of these things would put these moments in, but they could never make it really explicit and they could never give the characters a happy ending. So we got used to seeing queerness like that. We got used to seeing queerness as subtle or hinted at or, having a tragic ending. And so when people now see like full representation, it feels like a lot because we're really used to this subtlety. But I also want to like really make the distinction between queer people who are trying to put queerness in TV shows and being like forced to not because of the network or whatever, and people who like could make characters queer but choose not to and would rather just sort of queerbait. And both of those things are things that exist. You take something like The Legend of Korra, for instance, which is, they literally were told by the network that they couldn't make their characters explicitly queer until the very end when two characters held hands. And that's not queer baiting. That's very different to me than queer baiting, because that's somebody who was trying to make representation and couldn't, versus queer baiting where they're like, oh, we have queer fans and we want to keep them on the hook, but we don't actually want to go fully queer and give them that sort of representation. Yeah.
So with all of this, can you maybe give us a timeline or somewhat of a general history of queerness and femme representation in fandoms? Or the importance of fandoms for queer and femmes? I know you've talked a little bit about that, but if we can go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's a large part of what my research is looking at why there are so many queer people in fandom. And for a very long time, there was this idea that fandom was mostly made up of cis straight men and cis straight women. And it's become significantly more clear recently that there's a hell of a lot of queers in fandom. There's a lot of us there. And there have been since the beginning, and I talked a little bit about the way that queers would look for moments of subtext and try to write stories about that. But because there was such a deep lack of representation in actual media for so long, fan fiction for a lot of people became a way of seeing queer characters and experiencing queerness. And especially for sort of queer femmes who often are, no, I don't want to say forgotten, but are kind of sidelined a lot of the times in sort of queer movements, that seeing sort of queer characters and allowing characters to be femme and allowing them to have that femininity and like a feminine queerness as well is something that fandom sort of allows for, that hasn't been allowed always in mass media. It hasn't been allowed in sort of mainstream media a lot. And so if we trace the actual history of fandom, queer women have been a part of it since the onset, since the 60s, and writing Kirk and Spock fan fiction. But we look at, like, the X-Files was a massive fandom for a really long time, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, all of these things. There have always been this subsect of queer women there that are trying to create space for queerness online by writing stories, by creating art, by creating fan videos. And it's one of the sort of places online where queer femininity is sort of allowed to be its sort of full creative self.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit with me about the fake nerd girl. Am I saying that right? The fake nerd girl? Maybe we could talk about that a little bit before I get into my next question, which is an issue that is currently plaguing the Pokemon world.
Absolutely. Like, the fake nerd girl or the fake geek girl has, like, long been a figure, an imagined figure, I'm going to call it. But, like, of people, it comes from this idea that girls and women aren't geeky and they're not nerdy and they don't like those sorts of traditionally nerdy things. They don't like video games. They don't like sci-fi fantasy. They don't like comic books. All of these sorts of things that have for a very long time were considered things for male nerds. Women weren't sort of considered to be a part of those spaces, even though, and I will say this unequivocally, they have always been there and they have always been into these things. But there was an idea that they weren't. So then when women started showing up at conventions, started doing cosplay, started showing up in online gaming and all of these things, there was a subsect of male fans that felt like women were coming into their space, even though, like I said, they've always been there. But it felt like sort of an encroachment. And so they created this idea that there is this figure called the fake geek girl, who is a girl who isn't really nerdy, isn't really into that stuff, but shows up in order to get, like, cred, or in order to get attention, or, in order to be, get male attention and all of that stuff. And so you see this a lot in online gaming, and you see it a lot in comic book fandom and all of these things of women expressing their love or participating in these fandoms and being called fake geek girls because they don't really know. And you see this also with, like, if a woman comes in and starts talking about her love of something and immediately gets interrogated. Well, do you know, like, what happened in issue 14 of this or whatever? Like, then you're not a real, you're not a real fan if you don't know every single one of these details, when there are many and multiple ways of engaging with fandom.
I love that. I kind of want to make a hashtag that's like, not your fake geek girl.
Yes, do it.
Okay.
Participate in that.
So speaking about geek girls and women, right now in the Pokemon world, and specifically in the Instagram Pokemon community, there's this obsession right now with trainer cards. And I want to say that obviously trainer cards have been around as long as any Pokemon card because they are fundamentally important for gameplay. And with that, people have not really ever been very proud of their trainer cards. There's a couple that are like the holy grail that are worth a lot, but usually if you're going to be showing content, you're trying to find those like really heavy hitters like the Charizards, the legendary birds, your very rare, like amazing Pokemon. And in the last month and a half, there's like this thing that has happened and is blown up is everybody's showing off their trainer cards, especially the new full art trainer cards, which admittedly they're beautiful. And this is not to say that people have not been collecting them. People have been collecting them because people have been collecting full sets, because they're just beautiful in terms of artwork. But what we're seeing is not only a raise in people showing them off, but also in prices. And the market value of trainer cards, specifically full art female trainer cards, has skyrocketed in the last month and a half. Cards like Lily's Full Force or anything Lily related are now up to 200 if it's graded, up into the thousands. You have Nessa cards up to, 80s, and it's incredible. And all over Instagram, people are showing off these cards. So I wanted you to maybe talk about the interesting thing that is happening here about like the showing of these female figures, because it's more of the female ones that are getting this attention, and it's a lot of men showing off these cards, or like I've seen comments of being like, Lily's my girlfriend, or like, it's just very odd to me. And I know perhaps it'll pass, and I know it's like an entire consumerism thing, but thought maybe you'd have some really interesting insight on that collecting story now.
I think it's very related to the idea of the fake geek girl that we were just talking about, in that women are welcome, and I don't want to do the not all men thing here, but like, I'm aware that I'm not talking about every single person in fandom here, but I'm sort of talking about general trends where women are allowed, if they are sort of objects to be looked at, if they're sort of pleasing to the male gaze, then they're allowed in fandom. Whether that's the sort of booth girls at conventions that wear beautiful like cosplay, often sort of skimpier sorts of outfits that are welcome and allowed there. But as soon as a woman shows up that doesn't fit that perfect mold of femininity, they're not as welcome in fandom. And women that actually are participating in fandom don't tend to be as welcome. So the idea of these sort of like idealized trainers, female trainers, being the sort of new thing in Pokemon fandom sounds to me like another iteration of like, we want beautiful women that we can show, but we don't actually want women participating in fandom, which is like, women are there to be collected and looked at, but not to actually be a creative part of a fandom. And I'm not as familiar with Pokemon fandom as you are, as I've already stated, but this has happened in many fandoms. Like, you see it a lot in comic books where female superheroes are elevated, and like there's lots of art made of them, and there's lots of costuming made of them and all of that stuff. But as soon as they sort of take over, as it's often called, or become the main character, or attract a lot of female fans, then they become really hated. And we saw this with Captain Marvel. When Captain Marvel, Brie Larson was cast as Captain Marvel, and the Captain Marvel movie came out, Captain Marvel was fine for people if she was part of an ensemble cast. But as soon as she led her own movie, and led her own movie in a movie that made feminism an actual theme in the movie, then she became a problem. So this sounds to me like like that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that like you can't go call a woman on a card your girlfriend. Like I absolutely have like fictional girlfriends from many shows. I have a few fictional boyfriends, which as a lesbian is a little weird for me too. But, like we all have that attraction to fictional characters, and we all use fictional characters for many different purposes. But it's the idea like they're only sort of allowed in that capacity, and you're not actually welcoming to the actual women in your fandom, and that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I just want to make a note for people who are watching that we know that that's not the only way we can talk about this. I mean, I'm very much aware that there's this shift in product right now, and people are trying to make money, so they're trying to find the new niche that's really exciting. It's just weird to me that the niche that is now exciting is like these really cute female trainers, and not like some of your gruntier male ones. So that's always really funny to me. But I mean, cool niche.
Yeah. Like, it could also be like people are just really into female trainers too right now, and like that's cool. Like if more representation for women in every fandom is something that I'm all about.
All right, well, I wanted to ask you, I know you've talked a little bit about this, but what fandoms are you drawn to? Like, which ones are your favorite? Which ones would you recommend to me?
I've been a part of a lot of fandoms in my life. We'll start with the most recent, and I'll talk about a few others that I've been really a part of. I have been very heavily, as you know, Professor, I have been very heavily into Schitt's Creek fandoms over the last year.
I got a shout out!
You did! You got a shout out in my fanfiction. I think with a lot of people with the pandemic, a show that's nice, a show that shows people getting better and shows the, like, as Dan Levy, the creator, puts it, the transformative power of love, I think has been really important for a lot of people in the pandemic. And for me, it's definitely been a draw. And so I'm currently reading and writing fan fiction in Schitt's Creek fandom. But I've also, for many, many, many years, was very heavily into Marvel fandom, and specifically Captain America. And I'm still sort of have half a toe in that fandom, and it probably will get reignited when the new MCU TV shows come out. I'm sure I'll get back into it. But I've been part of that. I started way back in the day, like I mentioned, with Boy Meets World and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Buffy. But I've been a part of Lord of the Rings fandom, Harry Potter fandom, Teen Wolf, which I'm kind of like half embarrassed about and half like whatever. No,
I love Teen Wolf.
But for me, it's usually sci-fi fantasy shows that I get attracted to. But I'm very much into shows that have a component of found family or queer family formations in them, which I think the Avengers definitely can represent that. I think Schitt's Creek talks a lot about different ways that people can form familial relationships. So yeah, over time, I've sort of been attracted to fandoms that have that component to it. And if you are looking for like a nice fandom, Schitt's Creek fandom is where it's at right now.
Hell to the Canadians.
It's just very Canadian, very just like nice. It's one of the least drama-filled fandoms I've ever been in, which is kind of nice because the MCU fandom can be a lot sometimes. And I had a brief sort of stop off in Star Wars fandom last year, and I love Star Wars, love it to pieces. But that fandom it can be toxic.
All right, so to avoid toxicity in these fandoms, Angie, what are some of the ways that we can continue to carve out some space for queer femme representation in these fandoms?
I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. I think if you're not queer and femme, understanding that people see different representation than you do and see different moments and get different things out of a text than you do, I think is really key. And I think we really should let people experience fandom as they want to, instead of trying to gatekeep fandom and try to be like, there's only one possible interpretation, there's only one possible interpretation for this character, because that's never been the case. There's always been many and multiple interpretations, and So allowing queer people to have their interpretations and enjoy those interpretations is something that I would definitely say if you're not a queer femme person. If you are a queer femme person, keep creating, like create stuff, be part of it, take up space. I think we should all be part of taking up space in fandom and asserting our presence and our validity of being there. Like we're allowed to be there. We're allowed to create the stuff that we want. And so I think creativity is really sort of one of the driving forces of fandom and always has been, and gives people representation and gives people stories that they might not be able to get anywhere else. Because I know for me, for many, many years, the only way that I could really see positive queer femme representation was through fan fiction. And I'm definitely not saying that all fan fiction is great, awesome representation. There's a lot of crap out there. But there's also a lot of moments of possibility in fandom and in fan fiction that I think is really positive. And I think to keep creating those and keep capitalizing on those and keep trying to make space for queer femmes is for all of us, that's something that we can do.
Thank you, Angie, so much for all of your thoughtful comments and your really good answers. As a thank you for being here, we are going to do something super, super fun. We are going to do a rip and ship. A rip and ship. Like, what is a rip and ship? I got you this box. So for those of you who don't know, I picked out the Kingdra EX box for Angie specifically because not only does Angie love blue, normally her hair is like this color, but also I thought Kingdra was a pretty cool queer Pokemon since they can be both male and female, but their name is Kingdra, and like, look how
I love that.
clear that is.
That's amazing.
So as a thank you, I'm going to open this with everybody and with you, Angie, and you'll get to see what it's open, and then I'm going to ship it to you as a thank you. So hopefully there's some fun stuff in here.
Thank you so much. That's so nice of you. Thank you.
No, it's so nice of you to be sharing your knowledge with us on the internet. All right, so we're going to get into the unboxing. Are you ready, Angie?
I am. I'm very excited.
All right, so I've actually never opened the Kingdra EX box. This is my first one, so I'm really stoked to do this with you. And what I love about them is that they come with evolution packs, as well as some Sun and Moon and Fate Collide. So you're going to get a little bit of everything, which is really fun. I just want to show the packaging a little before. So the back just talks about Kingdra. Apparently Kingdra is the ruler of the ocean. I mean, that's debatable. I guess because Kingdra, I would probably say Gyarados is probably the most intense water Pokemon, but cool. Yeah, so we're gonna just get into it. I've had this here for a couple weeks now for you, Angie, and I'm so excited.
I'm excited.
This is Angie's first rip and ship.
Yay!
This is my first rip and ship, I think. I think I've only sent one ever rip and ship to people before. I've got some top loaders ready for you in case you get anything super intense. This is not a very efficient situation here. Alright, so this is the promo card that comes with it. Kingdra EX. This is beautiful. So, Angie, I'm going to show it to you just because you're looking at a different screen than me. But this is the promo.
Oh, that's nice.
Isn't it beautiful?
Very beautiful.
Also, if you are playing, because I know we've played a couple times, this is actually normally it takes 2 stages to get to a Kingdra. Usually you need a Seadra and a Horsea. And so the odds really pulling, that's really, really hard when you're playing. But because it's a GX, they've made it into a basic, so you can just play this one without them. And it only needs like 1 energy of any color in order to do an attack.
Well, that's cool.
So add this to your water deck we've made.
I'm going to, yes, absolutely.
I'm going to put that one in a sleeve for you. Okay, so then also, like all of these other boxes, they come with these large promo cards. This one's kind of weird. You just pull it. So it's just like a big version of the little one. So you can frame it or...
That's nice.
keep it. So you get the full promo, which is just a larger version of the smaller one. And what we do with these is we've been putting them in the comic book sliders just to keep them clean. But I also have some framed.
I think there's a couple places in my place that would look very nice. So.
Yeah, it's a really cool card. Okay, so we have that. And then as I told you, so we have an Evolutions pack, a Fates Collides pack, a Sun and Moon pack, and then another Evolutions pack. So, which one do you want to open first? Which one do you want me to open first?
One of the Evolution ones.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I'm just going to open it.
They're blue and I like blue.
So I'm going to open it, again, under the light. Or under the... Ooh, you actually started off with a V-drill.
That's cool.
Here, maybe I'll just do this. Here's the Professor Oak. Nidoking. Super Potion, that's really important. A Diglett. A Caterpie. Oh, Bright Whirl. Can add that to your water deck. Pikachu. Ponyta. I love Ponyta. Oh, Duro! Look at this! Look at this!
That looks amazing.
You got a Ninetales Break. That's a fun one. Here, I'm going to put that in a sleeve right away for you. That's a great one.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Like, I'm not as familiar, but, like, if you're excited, I'm excited.
If you're excited, I'm excited. I'm so excited.
You're the expert, so...
Okay, which one would you like to open next?
The green one.
Okay.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, the Fates Collide. Alright, let's see what we're gonna get. You see that? It's another water. Wow, you're like racking up the waters.
I like the waters.
Here, I'm gonna, as I put them down, put them here so people can see them. Oh, I love... Okay, so the Zygarde's a weird card because the Zygarde actually has multiple different forms. So there's a lot of different ones of those ones. And I don't have the dog ones, so... Cute! Birdie. Oh, a Cottony. It's a fairy Pokemon. Okay, look at the seal. Look at the seal.
That's super cute. That's adorable.
I feel like I'm like so excited.
It's so cute.
Alright. We've got a reverse hollow.
Amazing.
And what else? Oh, that's the last one. Okay, so a Mothim. So we got a reverse hollow Mothim. That's not bad.
And the one you were saying has many and multiple different forms. It's like, that's very queer. So that's cool.
It's very queer. Alright, which one would you like to go next?
Do the Sun and Moon one.
Okay. This is so exciting. I'll also send you your code card, so if you decide to play online. That's the first energy we've pulled. Ooh. Another trainer. Metapod.
That looks very cute.
A Piplup, or a Poppley. A Zubat. That's like one of the oldest cards ever. A Caravana.
Looks neat.
Shubble? I can't read them because they're backwards. A Snubble. A Wingle? A Wishy-Washy. And a Lapras GX! Oh my gosh, you're on fire!
That looks... I am not entirely certain what that is, but it looks very cool.
This is the lesbian one. The one that moves around things. Oh my gosh, you're getting like all the queer hits!
Yes, I love it. It feels very appropriate that you're opening up a bunch of queer ones.
It's really cool. Well, you know what? Ninetales is also another queer one because people say that Ninetales has the lesbian haircut.
Absolutely, yes. That is absolutely
And she's getting all of the queer hits. I picked out the perfect Kingdra box. All right, your last pack.
Yay! It's exciting. Even when I don't know all that much about Pokemon, this is still very exciting.
It is. Yes, it's always exciting to open cards. Oh, look! Poliwhirl.
Very nice.
Poliwrath. So you have the Poliwhirl, or the Poliwag. Now you have the Poliwrath, and then you just need one more. You have Poliwhirl.
Amazing.
Trainer. Charizard Link. A Charmeleon. Green Energy. Rattata. A Vulpix for your Ninetales. Electabuzz. A Magikarp.
I love Magikarp.
Ooh, a Reverse Hollow Machamp. That's another queer hint. Yes. Angie.
Are smiling on us today.
Angie has gotten all the queer hits out of this Kingdra box.
I feel like that's very appropriate.
That is so appropriate. That is so cool. Check out these queer hits.
Amazing. They all look incredible. I'm very excited to actually see them in person.
Thank you, Angie, for being here with us and to sharing your queer and fun knowledge. I'm really excited to have done this with you. I know we talked about it for a while, and I'm really happy that it finally came to fruition.
Me too. Thank you for having me. It's like I said, I'm always thrilled to come in and talk about queerness and fandom, but especially with a good friend, it's super fun to do that and to talk about Pokemon, which I'm not as familiar with. It's really an interesting conversation to have. So
we're gonna get you into it.
I'm already getting into it, and if we could actually hang out in person,
I mean,
a bit more. But,
if COVID, would stop and we weren't on a lockdown, we could probably have a tournament or two in the.
Maybe we'll find a way to do it even with COVID still going on.
Fun fact, Angie's first deck, I've never won to yet.
Yeah.
I have yet to beat Angie.
I'm 3-0, or I'm not sure. But
Thank you so much, Angie. It's a pleasure to see you and to have you here. I love you and I miss you.
I love you and I miss you too. Thank you for having me.
Bye, my Poké darlings. I hope you love Angie as much as I do.